I-V-M.
Going for parties is just so frustrating these days. I mean, your mom will make it a point to come and tell you how her friend's son has secured a house for her, and your wife will also find out that her sister's husband is taking her on a foreign holiday, while you're wondering why you're the only one who doesn't have a plan for the damn future. That's why I never sleep well during the festive time. Unless... www.hdfclife.com. Select. Done. You know what? I think I'll sleep rather well after all. Live calm. With HDFC Life, click to protect life. The Income Plus option offers life cover and steady income stream, so you're always ready for any expenses that life throws at you. Basically, this plan lets you plan your expenses like you plan your vacations. It's that simple. Visit hdfclife.com to know more and for terms and conditions.
Here's your smart fact of the day. The Joe Rogan Experience is the world's largest podcast. It has about 11 million listeners per episode. Wow, 11 million listeners per episode. But recently, Joe Rogan has come under a lot of controversy for two reasons. One is around COVID and the second is around being racist. And because of this, Spotify has chosen to continue with Joe Rogan but has removed about 70 episodes which may have racial slurs in them. Now, for somebody who's made about 1,700 episodes across maybe even more than a decade, removing 70 episodes doesn't seem much, but it does signify something. Welcome to Smarter With Sid. And in this episode, I'm going to try and decode what has happened to the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe Rogan, and what we can actually experience from cancel culture and whether it's right or wrong over the next few minutes. When I started my podcast over 2 years ago, one of the first episodes I'd done was on the Joe Rogan Experience, wherein I talked about how that specific podcast had kind of inspired me into doing my own podcast. Yes, Joe Rogan is inspiring because of all the stuff that he's done. You know, he is a commentator, he's a stand-up comedian, and he was a martial artist at one point in time. He's done some really interesting and funny shows, and he also runs the world's biggest podcast. Well, I think that I use Joe Rogan, and I used to use Joe Rogan just to listen to some interesting stuff. It used to go on for more than an hour, 2 hours, and allowed me to go to sleep actually. So it's a funny way of using a podcast, but there you go. I've learned a lot from all the guests that Joe Rogan has got onto the podcast that he runs, as well as had many hours of drifting back into sleep, listening to some nonsensical conversation that he might be having with other stand-up comedians. Yes, because there's a lot of variety there. But today, I stand at a place wherein I'm particularly perturbed by Joe Rogan. In fact, I was listening to a lot of his recent episodes, and one of the things that had struck me, even before all the controversies hit, was the fact that Joe Rogan seemed to be a little biased against COVID vaccinations. And I don't think that he, number one, recognized that he was biased. And two, I think that he was also trying to present a different perspective or a different point of view to people who were, thinking about vaccination. And he was looking at the social media angle and the political angle and the contrarian perspectives of the experts that he brought on the show. All well and good, till the time that a lot of people, including Neil Young as well as Joni Mitchell, decided to get rid of their music on Spotify because of them not agreeing with what Joe Rogan was doing, that was spreading, in their words, misinformation about whatever was happening on the Joe Rogan Experience. Now, this was followed by another clip appearing and making the rounds on YouTube, which was a consolidated clip of all the times when Joe Rogan was coming across as racist. He'd made some really bad racist slurs. And, in that specific clip, even Joe Rogan says so, he does come across as a complete racist. He does say that it was taken out of context and it was not because he's a racist, but he was just trying to make some jokes, or he was just trying to, make a point about how stupid racism is and the rest of it. But To my mind, these did not wash again, because I don't think Joe Rogan realizes that when he's kind of making fun, or when he's talking about racism in the particular way that he does, he actually realizes what he's doing. He is kind of certainly provoking, that unfelt anger in a lot of people who do experience racism on a daily basis. So what happens? What is this all about? And does Joe Rogan have a future? Let's kind of delve into this a little bit. And once I started delving into this a little bit, one thing I realized was that these two controversies that are, coming up at the same point in time are quite a coincidence, isn't it? I mean, it almost looks as if somebody's out there to get him. Somebody's out there to get the successful podcaster that he is. He had certainly caught people's eye when he moved to Spotify with his deal on Spotify, which made him exclusive to that specific platform. He was out of YouTube, and he also had got a lot of money and a lot of fame because of his move. Now, whether there is a concerted effort, in getting rid of Joe Rogan or canceling Joe Rogan or whatever the case may be, I think that we need to be very specific about the core issues at hand. A lot of times we don't really understand the kind of biases all of us are in, and we speak from those biases, myself included, without really understanding what we are saying. I did see Joe Rogan's apology on Instagram, and I think that it was okay. I mean, he did explain it to everybody about how he did not intend to be racist, but in his own words, if you say that I don't intend to be racist, it is probably coming across as racist, isn't it? Now, the fact is that whether, he's right or the world is right is a matter that I would certainly leave in the judgment of people who are impacted by racism much more than I am. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the cancel culture and its impact on an artist like him. Now, we've seen a lot of people being cancelled. There have been, many people talking about cancel culture. I certainly have had an episode earlier on cancel culture itself. And funnily enough, upon doing a deeper dive on cancel culture, what I've realized, especially in a conversation with my younger daughter, who happens to be an influencer on Instagram and on TikTok, that people who do get cancelled, for whatever they have said, without them being, really, how do I say, being found guilty in a place of law, typically find that they do lose followers, but they also gain or double down on the number of followers that they eventually end up having. Now, that's a strange kind of phenomenon. The strangeness of this phenomenon is because people love to identify and become part of a tribe. If you're taking a stance on something, makes you seemingly, connect to a particular value that the tribe has, then you are going to actually increase the number of followers just because you're getting cancelled. Now, that's ironical, but there is some merit and truth in that. Another aspect that I did find, which is pretty specific to the Joe Rogan experience, was a lot of his earlier podcasts. I think he changed his method of operation maybe a year or two back because of the pandemic. He was forced to do so. He was recording everything live. So whatever was happening in that moment, in the heat of the moment. And I'm not being an apologist for Joe Rogan. I don't think that allows you to be so carefree with your words that you can't get away by saying that it is just a conversation, or that's how stuff is and don't listen to me, is what he says. The fact is that you are taking a huge risk as a social media and a media figure when you are choosing to actually have a live conversation and put it out there without really taking into consideration all the ramifications of whatever you're going to say. Now, where does this leave Joe Rogan? It leaves him in a very interesting place. Now, while I'm sure that he obviously is financially set and he's got his own ardent followers and the rest of it, I don't think anything will come to hurt that specific aspect of his. It is indeed funny to notice that he has always railed against the establishment Joe Rogan has always talked about mainstream media and how mainstream media is extremely biased and extremely, one-sided in their approach towards things. Now, Joe Rogan has become the establishment. Yes, he started off from an obscure place like a podcast when podcasts were not famous. He quickly, rapidly rose to, becoming the world's greatest podcaster. And today, podcasts are becoming mainstream. Podcasts are becoming the main place wherein people are going in to understand a certain opinion, a certain voice. It is not the mainstream media which is the establishment anymore. It is Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is, unfortunately or fortunately for him, the establishment. This is a natural cycle of things, and this natural cycle of things has come and bit Joe Rogan a little where he doesn't want to be bit. And to be honest, this seems to be the way in which human beings are. People start off as anti-establishment and then become establishment themselves. And then, the inevitable downfall happens. As far as I'm concerned, as a podcaster, it is something that is certainly a learning moment for me. I will certainly choose, not because I'm afraid of getting cancelled, but I will choose not to hurt people through any comments that I might make through my own podcast. On that sobering note, I'd like to say, I hope you like this episode of Smarter With Sid. What I try to do is go down and try to understand some phenomenon which is trending in the outside world, but go to first principles and understand why is something happening the way it is. And it is always good to understand it, because then it allows you to have more than just one perspective, which is not tribal in nature. And hey, if you like podcasts like these, there's the IVM podcast that you can always listen to, the IVM podcast app, or just go to wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and go for IVM. And if you like me, then why don't you just, like this episode, like this podcast, subscribe to this podcast, and you could follow me as the Traveling Professor on LinkedIn and Instagram, wherein I'm most active. On that happy note.
Hi, I'm Rohan Joshi, and on my podcast, the show about crypto, I've been having some pretty cool conversations with industry experts about what exactly cryptocurrency is and what makes it so exciting. If you haven't already, please check it out on the IVM Podcasts Network. Now, a quick shout out to my fellow crypto heads. We've got a listener survey going on, which will take not more than 10 minutes of your time to fill out. So please check the link in the description and help me out by filling it up. Don't forget to tune into a show about crypto on the IVM app and wherever you get your podcasts from.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by actor and producer and author Tushar Kapoor. They discuss his new book, Bachelor Dad and Life as a Single Parent. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik asks Ajit Andhare about his journey from a practicing engineer to the COO of Viacom 18 Studios. On the Wire Talk, Siddharth is joined by social scientist Thomas Bloom Hansen. They discuss the escalating violence in India. On Smarter With Sid, Siddharth contemplates whether Facebook's crash is a blip or a sign of things to come. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav takes us to Himachal's most sought-after tourist destination, Manali. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our others for that matter, please do tell a friend. Don't forget to rate us on any other platforms that you're listening to us, whether it's a rating, whether it's a review, it all helps. And do remember to check us out on YouTube. We have a number of channels. They're available on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, I would like to thank our sponsors this week, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and HDFC Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.